Hello and welcome back to the Mumbles and Things YouTube channel. My name is Maggie if we haven't met each other before. I'm also Maggie if we have. And on this channel I talk about witchcraft a lot. So I've been doing a series where I'm answering questions that have been submitted, and I recently asked in my Instagram stories for people to submit questions specifically surrounding shadow work, because I thought it might be a little bit more helpful if these question and answer videos had more of like a theme, so you can get a bunch of different questions on the same topic answered at the same time. So in this video I will be answering all questions about shadow work in relation to witchcraft that were submitted to me from Instagram. And in previous videos it's a little bit more of a mishmash, but they're still valuable as well, and I may reference those videos. So make sure you check out that playlist. It should be up here in this corner. Somehow it'll pop up and you can watch some previous videos, have other questions answered about witchcraft. And if all of that sounds good to you, if that sounds interesting and you want to learn more about witchcraft, then make sure that you subscribe to this channel and you hit the bell so that you're notified every time I put a new video up. And please also like this video to tell the algorithm that this is valuable content that you enjoy. So without further ado, I'll answer the first question surrounding shadow work. So I thought it would be good to start with this question: what is shadow work? So this person hasn't encountered that term before, or maybe knows practices but hasn't heard it called that name. So we'll start at the beginning. Your shadow is a term coined by Carl Jung, and it is about the part of your mind. Carl Jung is a famous psychologist, and it's a part of your mind that you store your repressed memories, emotions that society or you or your parents or guardians have told you is not acceptable. So like taboo feelings, usually emotions that don't feel very pleasant in your body, like anger and sadness. Those kinds of emotions are, some people will suppress them and they get stored up in the shadow. It's the part of you that is deemed unacceptable in like polite society. One way to think about your shadow is, if you're familiar with your natal chart, there's your sun sign, which is sort of what most people know about you, what you show the world, especially people who know you well. There's also your rising sign, which is more of like your first impression that people have of you. And then your sun sign is sort of your public self. And your moon sign is your inner self, like who you know you are, but you might not necessarily have presented that part of yourself to other people, except for people who you are very intimately close with. So that would be your shadow, is that very deep inner self that you might not even know that well, and certainly most other people do not understand that part of you. And so with that understanding of what the shadow is, shadow work is what you do in order to learn how to accept that part of yourself, because again, society, family, friends might have told you that those parts of you are unacceptable, or you've decided that those parts of you aren't acceptable. And so at some point you can engage in practices of shadow work where you learn to accept them, integrate them, love those parts of yourself. Because another way to think of your shadow is like a neglected child, someone who hasn't had love and support and encouragement. And so shadow work is a way that you can nurture that child and help that child to grow into a more healthy person. So basically that's shadow work, is integrating your shadow self that is deemed unacceptable with your light self, which is considered acceptable. So we'll move on to the next question, which is I sort of answered it when I talked about what is shadow work, but this person is asking, how does your shadow develop? Does everybody have a shadow? And yes, everybody has a shadow self. There's a balance between these two sort of halves of ourselves. And like I said, shadow work is about integrating these two halves of ourselves into one fully whole human. So the shadow is formed each time a parent or guardian tells you to stop crying, or each time you're told not to have a fit, or when you've had a traumatic experience and you have suppressed it to protect yourself. All of these are forming the shadow self, or adding to the shadow self, or growing the shadow self. And doing shadow work is where you learn, instead of just stop crying, figure out why you're crying, find a way to fix the problem, whatever has provoked the sadness, and learn how to move on from that emotion healthfully rather than just, stopping it in its tracks. Or if you're angry and you're told to not be angry and to just shut that down, instead of just suppressing it and saying, oh, I'm not angry anymore, working through what caused you to be angry. If there's a conflict with another person, working through that conflict and trying to find some sort of compromise. So working through the anger instead of suppressing it. And then for those like traumatic experiences that I mentioned, if you've had something that was really traumatic happen to you in your life, that contributes to your shadow. And some people who haven't had an opportunity to work through those traumatic experiences and all of the emotions that it brings up through, therapy or counseling, it can come up in unexpected ways. So it's good to have the tools in place to help you work through those traumas in order to move past them and understand how it's contributed to who you are, learn lessons from it, and not let it affect you in a destructive way. So this person says, I've heard a lot about shadow work lately, but I'm not interested in practicing shadow work. Why do I have to do shadow work? So I guess I'll start by saying that nobody has to do anything. You don't have to do shadow work. I have found that shadow work is very valuable in helping me to understand myself and helping me to learn about the emotions that I'm feeling and helping me to work through those emotions and helping me to work through the experiences I've had in my life. But of course, you don't have to do shadow work. I will say that shadow work is very valuable, like I said. So even if you don't want to, turn off the video, you don't have to watch this, you don't have to learn about it. I hope that you do, because maybe you will learn something, or maybe you will be inspired to at least try shadow work. But again, you don't have to. I find that with witchcraft and with working with magic, that shadow work and light work it's a polarity. And so there is a spectrum, first off, of how much you would need to do based on your personal experiences. I feel like I should go back and explain what a polarity is. So there's one type of relationship between energies, and that's a duality. Those are when things are opposites of each other, inviting things in and projecting things out. There's being active and there's being passive. So these are dual energies. And then I think with the shadow and with the light work, that's on a spectrum, because it's hard to know exactly when something fades from light into dark. There's a big spectrum in between where those lines are blurred. And so that's the difference between dual energy and polar energy. Another example of polar energy is like temperature. There's hot and cold at these extremes, but there's a gradation in between that, where there's, warm, there's cool. The transition point between hot and cold is not clear. There's not a clear line. So with shadow work, there's a degree that some people will benefit from more than others. So there is a spectrum of how much shadow work each individual might benefit from. Since there is this spectrum from shadow to light, I think that in order to be in this light work arena that a lot of people want to be in, this, there's what's considered like the love and light movement, or positive vibes only, or, think positive thoughts and all of that. In order to exist in that space, it's hard to do that without having confronted the shadow, accepted the shadow, and integrated the shadow, without doing what's called spiritual bypassing. So some more terms. Spiritual bypassing is a term coined by John Wellwood, and he wrote about spiritual bypassing as the use of spiritual practices to avoid confronting some of the more negative aspects of life. That's a paraphrase. That's not the exact quote of what he wrote. And so you do see that in some cases where, oh, I'm so hungry. So I don't know if you just heard my stomach growl. If you do identify with wanting to live in this like positive mindset only space, it's hard, like I said, it's hard to do that without spiritual bypassing, which is what happens if you don't do the shadow work. In talking, it's bringing to mind an example of, I feel like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a good representation of what happens if you ignore your shadow. Obviously, it's a metaphor, but I do think it's a really interesting way to look at a suppressed shadow, how it might emerge if you don't work with it, if you don't look at it. So there's Dr. Jekyll, this, respectable doctor. And so that is, that living in the light work arena, ignoring Mr. Hyde. And it almost becomes this like split personality where he has no control over Mr. Hyde. It just emerges. Mr. Hyde ended up committing heinous crimes, so that's not necessarily exactly what might happen to someone who ignores their shadow. But again, it's a metaphor that the shadow might erupt in unexpected ways that could hurt someone, like if it ends up with you yelling at someone who's undeserving, or hurting someone in another way who doesn't necessarily deserve that sort of outburst, because you haven't learned about your emotions and you haven't learned how to work through your emotions in a healthy way. I just want to say again, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to, and particularly when it comes to shadow work, it can bring up a lot of hardships, and I know some people who have engaged in shadow work have had bouts of depression after working with the shadow, and so it's something to engage in with care and in a way that's going to help you in the long run, and if necessary, with the help of a therapist, a counselor, or with someone else that you trust, like a spouse or a partner or a family member who has your best interest at heart, because sometimes it can be really hard to go through what happens when you do shadow work, and especially doing that on your own. Okay, so the next question, this person is asking, they said, it seems like shadow work is a lot of negativity, and is there anything good that comes out of it? So I do feel like I've sort of answered that along the way, but just to be really specific, yes, it does, like I said, it does bring up some things that it's hard and challenging when you do shadow work, of course, because these are the parts of yourself that you've suppressed or repressed or hidden from yourself. And sometimes your mind will do this to protect you from those negative memories that are painful. They feel bad in your body, and so your mind is protecting you from that. And looking at it is going to bring up those painful feelings and painful memories. So of course there is negativity, but there are benefits from going through it and getting to the other side of it. One thing is I found that it's really improved my relationships because I'm able to understand myself more, which means that I understand my emotions more, and it means that I understand how I'm going to relate to other people. And in some cases, it's even helped me to see certain things in other people that I care about, and I can be more understanding and caring toward them because I know that there's certain things that I'm going through. It's that quote, everybody is fighting an invisible battle that you know nothing about. And shadow work really helped me to see that, because not only was I facing my internal battles and my invisible battles that I wasn't showing other people, but it made me realize that of course other people are doing that as well. Other people have invisible battles, and I can be compassionate and more understanding of why they might be lashing out in some cases, or why they might have a negative reaction to something. So I think that it really does help to improve my relationships. It's helped me to learn more about myself, like I said, so I think it helps you to get to know yourself. It's a really big part in getting to know who you are. So like I was talking about before with like your natal chart, that's one way to get to know yourself, and you get to see that moon side or your shadow side, and how that might be impacting the way that you view the world and the way that you react to things. It helps to have a better perspective on yourself in terms of like your place in the universe, in the world. I think, a lot of times, I don't know, everyone's experience of themselves is different, but there's some people who have a really big impression of themselves, and a lot of us go through life thinking we're the main character of our own movie. And that's because, we're with our own thoughts all the time. So there's that perspective of, I'm so important. Doing shadow work can kind of help you to reel that back in, to not be so self-important, and to recognize that everybody else is having those kinds of experiences themselves, that they're having their own movie happening and you're just a side character. So there's that perspective of it. It helps you to remember that you're not larger than life. And it also helps you to realize that you are important. So it gives you a more balanced perspective of your place in the world, that you are worthy of love, and you are worthy of care, and you are worthy of being understood on a deep level because you put that time in to understand yourself. So it gives you this sense of importance, but it also helps you to remind yourself that you're not the only important person, that there's other people that also are worthy of love and care. So I think that's kind of an interesting aspect of it. And then I guess the last thing that I've found to be really beneficial about shadow work, from coming out of, from working through those really hard emotions, is that there's a lot of my creativity that comes from my shadow. So Carl Jung said that 90%, I think, I don't know exactly the statistic that he said, but the majority of your shadow is actually golden. So there's the golden shadow, where a lot of my gifts and talents emerge from my shadow. The things that I've gone through, and the emotions that I've experienced, who I am on an inner level, on a deep level inside, that's where most of my uniqueness and creativity comes from. And I think that other people probably have this similar experience, that that's your unique self, because we have different experiences. So of course you're going to be unique based on what's going on, your own thoughts, something that can't be replicated by another person, because we can never know another person's inner monologue. We only have our own inner monologue. So that's like the most unique part of each of us on an individual level. So I think connecting with that has helped me to be more myself, to be more authentic, because I can recognize my inner monologue and how it makes me unique. Okay, so this person asks, where is a good place to start where a lot will be revealed to work through? So if you know that you have a lot to work through with shadow work, I think it would be beneficial to have someone with you during at least one of the first exercises that you might do, and kind of just dip a toe in. So I think about shadow work as like a pool of water, but like the ocean. So maybe not a pool, but like an infinite amount of water, where you could swim forever and ever and maybe not find a bottom or another side. Starting out, you might want to just walk in feet, just a little bit. So just take a few steps from the beach into the water to explore, just for safety. And I think that to do that, taking a few steps in and going in slowly, it's very helpful to have someone with you. So whether you have a therapist, if you have access to that kind of care, or if you know somebody who either has been with you and knows you pretty deeply and intimately, and they might even have an understanding of the types of things you've been through, having that person present to help you come back and to help you reemerge from that pool afterward, and to also be another caring person. Because again, shadow work is about offering care and compassion and love to your shadow. And so having an additional person nearby who can also offer care and love and compassion to your shadow can be really beneficial. So I think that's a good place to start for sure, is like having someone with you. And before engaging in any of the shadow work practices, I would recommend grounding and centering. So if you're not familiar with these two terms, grounding is basically when you have a lot of energy in you that you don't want. And so instead of letting it continue to be in your energy field, you ground it. And the term comes from the electrical term for grounding, where it's sent back into the ground instead of, short-circuiting a house. You send that electricity into the ground. So if you feel like you're short-circuiting, ground that energy back into the earth And it's sort of like I see it as like a recycling process where you let go of that energy and you can replenish with new, fresh energy that's been remade from all of that recycled energy. So that's grounding. There's a lot of ways to engage in grounding practices, and I'll link some resources for that below this video in the descriptions. And for centering, centering is the other practice that I mentioned. I see this as when your energy has gone, you've kind of scattered it in places. So particularly if you've done a lot of things, if you've had big emotions recently, if you've been doing a lot of activity, you kind of leave little bits of your energy around. And so the way I visualize it is like you are the center of your galaxy, and there's all of this energy that's kind of spiraling around you, and you need to pull it back in close. And by doing that, pulling your energy back in close, you have everything you need to engage in shadow work completely. So grounding to refresh your energy, and centering to pull it in close. And I guess one of the first ways that I would engage in shadow work is to use a tool like the tarot or runes or something that you're comfortable with that can kind of project on back to you what you're thinking and what you're feeling, especially if you're not really familiar with any sort of like internal work. So using a tool, like I mentioned, the tarot, finding maybe a spread that will help you to get your first steps into shadow work. Maybe I'll make one and I'll share that as well. Note to self. So yeah, you can have like a tarot spread that will help you with shadow work type things. And I think those are good places to start. Like I said, just kind of easing into it. All right, so this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to, I think there's just about, well, there's quite a few more questions, so I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I might do a part 2. Let me know if you want me to do a part 2. But for now, I'll just go with this last question. This person is asking what kind of shadow work practices to try. The way that I view shadow work is that, yes, sometimes it is, diving into the ocean and looking at the shadow and really exposing it so that you can understand your inner self better. I also see that shadow work as sort of an everyday practice where you're observing yourself and how you're reacting to things and how you're relating to the people around you. It'd be like if you feel an emotion coming up, the shadow work would be to really observe that emotion and let it kind of play out and let you see where it takes you and let it resolve naturally. So if you feel like you need to cry, instead of just holding back your tears, finding a place where you are safe and comfortable crying. If you're in your office building or in the middle of a grocery store or something, that might not be the best place to engage in shadow work. But if you do find yourself experiencing these kinds of emotions when you're in a safe place like your own home, then you can just let those emotions play out, letting yourself cry until you feel like you can't cry anymore. And oftentimes that will show you, your mind will also be thinking like, what is happening? Why am I reacting this way? Where's this coming from? And you'll start to have thoughts and sorry, I just had like an ADHD, such an ADHD thing. What's that? Oh, it's a lizard. Oh gosh. And what I've experienced is that my thoughts will start to tell me where things are coming from, especially if it seems to me like the emotional response is out of proportion to what actually triggered it. And that's usually because there's something deeper. It's not that one thing, it's several things that maybe led up to it, or it reminded me of something that happened when I was a child, or it reminded me of something that happened that was really traumatic. And so if you let those emotions play out and you let your thoughts wander and you kind of observe what's happening, it's very likely that it's going to reveal to you more information about what's happening. And that better prepares you for the next time you have a similar reaction. You have more understanding about why it's happening, and you'll be able to work through that much quicker. And this is, the example I used was if you feel like you have to cry and just letting yourself cry it out. It's also if you feel like anger bubbling up and I don't know, for me it feels like tense and like I just want to like punch something, or I want to like make a fist and like tense all my muscles up or throw things. And I found that, you know, in the safety of my own home, again, not in a supermarket where that might not be the best place to let your rage out, but if in your home, you can like throw pillows and you can do things that can help you to work through that anger and figure out where it's coming from. Another way to engage in shadow work sort of on a daily basis is through monitoring your thoughts. And so your shadow can kind of reveal itself when you have negative self-talk or when you have intrusive thoughts. So those thoughts that are so in your face that they won't let you move on to something else. They want you to focus only on that. Or like I said, negative self-talk where you're belittling yourself or being hard on yourself for no reason, where you're really undeserving for that kind of ridicule or treatment in your thoughts. Being more observant of those thoughts and when they come up, and then trying to figure out where they're coming from. So if you have a thought of, like, for example, you make a mistake on a work project and the thought that comes up is, oh, I never do anything right. Where does that thought come from? Where does that thought originate? Because probably it's not true. You never do anything right. And how could that possibly be true? I'm sure there's lots of things that you do right. And so when that thought pops up, it's incorrect. And so you need to figure out, where's this coming from? And a lot of times it's like a specific experience or a time where that was told to you or where you told yourself that, and it became something that you've repeated throughout your life. And that's obviously just an example. There's other, you might not have that specific thought, but maybe you have some other variation. And then once you've kind of identified the thought, you can look for examples of times where it's not true. Because again, like I said, you never do anything right. Well, think about one time that you've done something right, and that can help you to understand the shadow where this thought originated, and also how you can kind of teach the shadow that those types of thoughts aren't true. So monitoring your emotions and monitoring your thoughts are two ways that you can engage in shadow work sort of passively, or at least like on a day-to-day basis where you're not saying, today I'm going to do shadow work. It's just like it comes up and this is your opportunity to do shadow work. But if you want to do shadow work activities intentionally and specifically sit down and do shadow work, one thing that I think is really interesting is to challenge your perspective on what makes a good person. Because if the shadow was born out of childhood experiences, traumatic experiences, suppressing emotions and repressing memories and all of that, then there's also this like light side, the good side, that emerges also from experiences. So being told you're such a good girl or you're such a good boy, or being praised for doing acceptable things or being praised for doing the right thing, it makes the split between good and bad even bigger, and it makes it hard to integrate the shadow because we think of it as bad. To bring sort of a balance between the two, recognizing the good parts of the shadow, like I mentioned before, I found that a lot of my creativity and what makes me me comes from my shadow rather than from my light. And vice versa, if you look for what's not so great about what you've been told is good, that can kind of bring these two back together and accomplish the goal of integrating the light and the shadow. So recognizing what's not good about what you've been told your whole life is good, recognizing what's not good about what you see as the best parts of you that you present to the world. So maybe it's that it's a mask that you've put on and it's not authentic, and that's a negative side of that. Or maybe it's that you're a people pleaser because you're always striving to be praised for doing those things. Or you're a yes man, you never say no, you're always trying to, which is I guess the same as a people pleaser, but finding parts that you don't like about the parts that you've been told are good. And vice versa, finding the parts that you do like about the parts you've been told are bad. And that will help to integrate. And so one way you can do this is to simply just think about it, to meditate on it, and to see what comes up. One practice that I really enjoy, I posted on Instagram recently about automatic writing, I think it is very helpful for letting the subconscious mind talk more than the conscious mind. So I'll link to that post in the description. So meditation, automatic writing, you can use tarot to help you with this, like choosing a card. So you could ask your tarot deck, like, this is one thing that I know I've been told is good about me, or I've been praised for, or I like about myself. What is a negative aspect of that thing? And then draw a card or a couple of cards and just see what comes up. And then vice versa. This is something that I've been belittled for. This is something that I've been ridiculed about, or this is something that people have told me is a bad trait of mine, or I've told myself is a bad trait. What's something good about it? And again, that's going to kind of bring those two halves more closer together and do that integration. So I hope you enjoyed this shadow work Q&A. A shadow work is one thing that I'm really interested in. I have Scorpio as my moon, so my moon is the shadowiest of all the signs, and so it really interests me and gets me excited. If you are also interested in shadow work, then I do hope that this helped you. And if you've never heard of it or you've never practiced shadow work, then I hope that you give it a try safely and with care. I want my comment sections to be an open dialogue, so feel free to respond to anything that I've said in this video if you disagree or if you agree, and open up a conversation. Like this video if you did in fact like it, or if you didn't like it, feel free to give me a dislike. That's fine too. This is a freedom of expression here. If you have any other witchcraft questions, feel free to check my Q&A playlist, which I have already linked in the, it might be up here. I don't know if I can do it twice, but it's earlier in the video, and if not, just go to my channel. And if that doesn't answer your questions, then check the description, because there's a link to a place where you can ask me your questions, and I will do my best to answer anything that is submitted. So I hope you have a really good morning, day, night, whenever you're watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.